Hi, it's Mr. Estrada here, and our aim for today is what are the different ways we can solve quadratic equations? So, what is a quadratic equation? It's an equation where the highest exponent is 2. So, for example, x squared plus 3x equals 2 is an example of a quadratic equation. Or you could say y equals squared minus 5x plus 3. That's a quadratic equation. So it's an equation where the highest exponent is 2. Okay, so what are some ways you can solve quadratic equations? I'm going to give you 3 ways in this video. You can use the quadratic formula, and this always works. Okay, or you can factor. This doesn't always work. So this doesn't always work because sometimes you have equations that are unfactorable. Or you can use the graphing calculator, and that also always works. So the graphing calculator always works as well. Okay, so let's go over the quadratic formula, shall we? So solving a quadratic equation by using the quadratic formula. All right, so here we have a quadratic equation and we're being asked to solve for x. So what you want to do first is set the equation equal to 0. So we can do that by moving this 8 to the other side, and the 8's are going to cancel out here, and we get 6x squared plus 13x minus 8 equals 0. Okay, now let's use the quadratic formula. What's the quadratic formula? Here it is. This is the quadratic formula right over here. Okay, you should write that in your notes and you should memorize it because it is not given to you on the Regents. So make sure you memorize that formula. So the quadratic formula says that the value of x, or excuse me, the values of x, because you're going to get 2 values for x. The values of x equal negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So what does all this b and a and c stuff mean? A is the coefficient of the x squared. B is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant, the one that doesn't have a variable next to it. So let's use the quadratic formula. We're going to substitute into the quadratic formula. So let's substitute. So b is 13, so we put b here, and we get negative 13 because of the negative in the formula. We substitute, so we're going to substitute b in here, and we're going to substitute b in here. So that's why we got negative 13 here because of the negative sign, so 13 goes there, and 13 goes here. You're going to substitute a here, so the 6 is going to go here, and in here. And then finally you're going to substitute the c in here. Keep in mind that c is negative 8. That sign has to come with it. So this is what you get when you substitute into the formula. Alright, now let's continue. You're going to simplify b squared and minus 4ac. So 13 squared is 169. And now we're going to simplify negative 4ac. So here's what I mean. We're going to multiply negative 4 by 6 and by negative 8. And we get positive 192. So it's going to be plus 192. Now you combine the result of b squared and minus 4ac. So what I'm saying is you're going to combine these two terms, and we get 361. Now you simplify the radical. In this case, 361 is a perfect square. So we get negative 13 plus or minus 19 over 12. Now you're going to break it into two equations. That's why you have the plus minus sign here. One equation is going to say x equals negative 13 plus 19 over 12. And the other equation is going to say negative 13 minus 19 over 12. Now I'm just going to solve each equation. Negative 13 plus 19 is 6, so you get x equals 6 over 12, which is 1/2. Over here, negative 13 minus 19 is what? That's negative 32. So we get x equals negative 32 over 12, and we could simplify that, and it simplifies to negative 8/3. So we get x equals 1/2, or x equals negative 8 over 3. Okay, keep in mind that with quadratic equations, you'll always have two solutions. And we will talk a little bit more about this at the end of the video as to why. Okay, you can also solve a quadratic by factoring. I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on this because I've covered factoring in other videos. So let's just briefly go over this. You're going to set the equation equal to 0. So you get this. Now you're going to use your knowledge of factoring to factor the quadratic. So how could we factor this? All right, so that's something I've covered already. That's called, we could use factoring by grouping here. You know, a times c, or 6 times negative 8, that's negative 48. And we could just rewrite this quadratic here. We could rewrite the two middle terms with the factors of negative 48 that add up to positive 13. And those factors would be negative 3 and plus 16. So you break it down the middle, factor out the GCF on the left side here, and the GCF here is 3x. So we're going to have 3x times 2x minus 1, right? And the GCF here is going to be 8. So we factor out an 8. So we got 8 times 2x and 8 times negative 1. And then you bring this into one binomial. You get 3x plus 8, and then you just make this into one binomial and you get 2x minus 1. So we factored it. After you factor it, you're going to set each of the factors equal to 0 and solve. So we're going to break it here. I'm going to set this one equal to 0. I'm going to set this one equal to 0. And you just solve each one. So subtract 8 over here, subtract 8 over here. This cancels out. You get 3x equals negative 8. Divide by 3. Divide by 3. And you get x equals negative 8 over 3. And now you do the other one. So add 1 here, add 1 here. You get 2x equals 1. Divide both sides by 2. And you get x equals 1/2. So those are the final answers. Okay, now if you go back in the video, you'll see that those were the same answers we got when we solved the same quadratic using the quadratic formula. So it's entirely up to you what method you want to use. If you want to use the formula or you want to use factoring. The advantage of the formula is that it always works, even though it might be a little tedious. The disadvantage of factoring is that it doesn't always work. Some equations are unfactorable. Okay, last one. Solving a quadratic by using the graphing calculator. I'm going to use a TI-83 here. So what you want to do is, first, you want to set the quadratic equal to 0. Okay, so there it is. I set it equal to 0 by moving the 8 to the other side. So now, let me put up the steps on the graphing calculator. Here they are. These are the steps I'm going to follow. So it says, press y equals and type in the quadratic. So press y equals, type in the quadratic. So we got 6x squared plus 13x minus 8. Press graph, and it says make sure you can see the zeros or where the parabola intersects with the x-axis. So what it's saying is, it's saying make sure you can see this and this. Those are what we call the zeros. All right? This is what we call the zeros. Let me see if I can write over this. No, it's not letting me write over it. Oops, I also just realized you can't see what I'm doing on the graphing calculator, so let me pull the calculator here. And you know what? I'm just going to go through the steps, and then you can just copy them down, all right? So the first step is to press y equals, and enter the quadratic. So it's 6x squared plus 13x minus 8. Press graph. Make sure you could see the zeros. So this is a 0, this is a 0. A 0 is where the parabola intersects the x-axis. So you want to make sure you can see those. Okay, so just in case you're having trouble, well, it's not letting me write on it, but look, that's a 0 right there, and that's a 0 right there. A 0 is where the parabola intersects the x-axis. Okay, now, make sure you could see that. After you press graph, press second, trace, go down to 0, press enter. And what you want to do is you want to move the cursor to the left of a 0. So let's start with this 0 here. Or, you know, a 0 is also called the root. So you move it, so here's the 0, I move to the left of it, press enter. Then it says right bound, you move to the right of it, press enter. Then press enter again, and there's your 0. You get x equals negative 2.6. Approximately x equals negative 2.6. We'll round it off to the nearest hundred, so we'll say x equals negative 2.67. And, you know, that's the negative 8 over 3. To get the other 0, do it again. Press second, trace, go down to 0. It says left bound, so you want to move to the left of the 0. So this is the 0 I'm looking for. So I'm going to go to it first by using the cursor. And I want to move to the left of it. So there it is. I'm to the left of it. Press enter, move to the right of it, press enter again, and you get x equals 0.5. So these are the same solutions that we got with the other methods. Okay, remember we talked about how there's always two solutions with quadratic equations? Well, here's why. Because you have a parabola, and a parabola, there's two sides to it. So you see the parabola here is intersecting the x-axis at 2 points, so that's why you have two solutions. Now, what happens when it only intersects the x-axis at 1 point? So for example, what happens when a parabola looks something like this? When it looks something like that, right? Let's assume that parabola is tangent to the x-axis, meaning it's only intersecting it at 1 point here. Okay, it's not drawn to scale. So what happens there? Do you have two solutions there? Well, technically, yes. You have equal solutions. You would say x equals -4 and x equals -4. Okay, I hope that this video helps. Take care. Oh, and just one last word, okay? It's entirely up to you what method you want to use to solve the quadratic. If you want to use the formula, factoring, or the graphing calculator, it's entirely up to you. Whatever you feel more comfortable with. All right, take care.